Thank you again, Corey. And now I'd like to go ahead and introduce John Andoh with the comment, Central Midlands Transit. Take it away.
Thanks, Casey. John Andoh here at the comment. I'm the Executive Director and CEO. And we're actually planning a fare-free system here in Columbia, South Carolina. We're taking a different approach on how we're going to cover the costs of a fare-free system. And I want to give you some background of what we're doing, how we're going to get there, and then ultimately what our next steps towards implementing such a system. So in the case of the comment, we get about $2.7 million in fare revenue a year, which is 9.2% of our overall budget. We spend $380,000 a year on fare collection. We also give away about $1.2 million worth of free service, which is in essence covered by our sales tax revenues because someone has to pay for those trips. We generate about $150,000 in revenue to cover free fares. And then we also pay our farebox vendor, GenFare, for various repairs or upgrades to the tune of $150,000, and it continues to increase each year. We've had this discussion with our service committee, our finance committee, and our board of directors on the true cost of free and the equity concerns in relation to free public transit. There's always a cost to free, as you're aware. Nobody rides public transit for free, even if free is allowed. And we're looking at this from the same perspective as public schools and public libraries, and generally how property taxes will cover the cost of those basic level of services at no cost to the user. Of course, when you take advantage of additional services beyond the basic level, there's associated fees that that user would have to pay. On the equity side, we have a downtown circulator called the Soda Cap Connector, which generally attracts visitors to the Columbia metropolitan area. And we provide that service free of charge. However, based on our recent survey we did, those folks generally have higher levels of income where they can generally afford to pay for public transit, whereas we have a lot of low-income riders that utilize the basic common transit system, and they spend $500 a year, $500 a year on public transit when they're struggling to pay for public transit. So we've asked the question, is that equitable? And then the last question we've asked is, what is the basis of determining who can ride free versus who can pay? So that's where it comes to, this is how we started looking at, maybe we need to start looking towards a fare-free transit system. In the case of our transit system on who rides for free, we have two categories. We have those that are subsidized by third parties. That's the $150,000 I mentioned previously. Generally, it's school districts, colleges, universities, healthcare providers, and a few employers. And then when we do special event shuttles. And then what is subsidized by the comment through our sales tax revenues are basically children, youth between 5 and 15 years of age, people transferring from other transit systems, employees, contractor employees, and when we also donate bus passes to nonprofit groups and personal care attendants and our DART ADA paratransit riders. One unique thing based on the approach that we're looking to take is we want to cover the free fares by, in essence, allocating our federal funds that are allocated to our urbanized area to cover operational costs. Because we're an urbanized area that operates less than 100 peak buses, we're allowed to use our 5307 funds to cover our operational expenses. So when we compare our urbanized area to a similar sized urbanized area in our state, which is Charleston, we learned that we have similar demographics and similar metrics. However, they carry about 1 million passenger trips a year more than we do. And they've also are able to generate about $800,000 in FTA revenue as a result of carrying that additional passenger trips a year. million passenger trips a year. So if we're able to do the same thing, we're projecting that we can potentially see an increase of federal funds into our urbanized area as well, which will be able to help us to continue to sustain paying for free fares to our transit system, as well as any other capital needs that would be required for our transit system. It does take 2 years for NTD to catch up with the reporting of the additional passenger that are utilizing the transit system. So we've taken that into consideration as part of our financial analysis. This chart gives you an idea of how our ridership has been over the past decade. Previous to 2011, the Comet is a fairly new transit authority, and we assumed operations from the local electric utility, which is previously known as the South Carolina Electric and Gas Company. They gave us transitional funding for 10 years to pay for the transit system. Because we ended up running out of that transitional funding and we were not successful in having a sales tax passed, we added to decreased service in 2011, which is why you start to see ridership trends decline. Starting in 2013, however, Richland County, one of the 2 counties in our service area, passed a sales tax to fund the transit system. So therefore, in July of that year, we started to restore transit services, and ridership continued to grow back to where it was back when the Comet first was created in the early 2000s. So our takeaways from our analysis that we've done is that we believe that ridership will increase. Likely it will increase 25 to 30%, but the increase is merely on the fact that the current transit ridership that is utilizing the transit system today will just make more trips on the transit system, which will give us the additional unlinked passenger trips that could be reported to the FTA. This was proven when we did a half fare test selling our bus passes at 50% off. We also believe that once we get that initial 25 to 30% increase, we're going to plateau, and it's not likely we're going to get substantial ridership gains. And that is just because of how the present transit system is designed. It follows old streetcar lines going back to the late 1800s, and demographics, jobs, points of interest have significantly changed since then. And right now we are undertaking a network redesign, which will look at current origins and destinations, map out employment sites, points of interest, and match passenger demands with the appropriate points of interest and employment sites, so we can have the right transit system for the 21st century and beyond. We also are mindful that because if we want to go fare free, that ADA paratransit also becomes fare free. That could result in additional paratransit ridership growth, which would require additional vehicles and service hours. So we need to plan for that accordingly. There could be some implications related to safety and security, and we need to prepare for that by ensuring that we have the proper rules and regulations in place governing those that want to use the transit system, so we can avoid those that are wanting to ride the transit system because they have no place to go from making continuous trips on the transit system, as well as overwhelming the transit system and not having enough capacity to take into consideration the free service. Our estimates will show that it will cost about $1.3 million if we did this for 6 months, or $2.3 million if we did this for a 1-year period. And as I mentioned before, the intent is that we would utilize our FTA funds for operations assistance to cover that deficit that we would lose from not collecting the fare revenue from the riding public. We would also see if we can utilize other grant funds such as Older American Act funds, hospitality tax funds, or community development block grant funds, which will help us in generating the appropriate revenues needed to cover that deficit. If we're successful in 2 years, it's likely that we can get up to an additional $1 million in federal funds to our urbanized area, just based on passenger miles growth when comparing to other UZAs in the country. So as a result, our service committee has asked staff to prepare 3 scenarios, which includes a completely fare-free, a fare-free for once a quarter for an entire month, or a fare-free for once a month for a 1-week period. And with the reduction of free programs that the Comet offers, if we do the latter 2 options that I recommended. My contact information is below, and if you have any questions on how we're proposing a fare-free system, please reach out and I'll be happy to share our analysis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. This was a wonderful presentation. We appreciate you being a part of the Fare Free Transit panel. Thank you.
Of course.